All right, I have a really important question to answer. And it's really important because if I have this question, then any non believers will definitely have this question if they ever start to seek out the Bible and try to find Jesus. Here's the question: why in the Old Testament is God so extreme in his punishments and so harsh and in my heart, cruel? Okay, so I was reading through Numbers, and I'll just give you a couple of really quick examples. One was there's a guy collecting firewood on the Sabbath. Moses and the people are like, "What do we do with him? He's breaking your law, God." And God says, "You have to stone him to death." Another one is there was a rebellion of a few people in the camp when they were in the wilderness going to the promised land, and they were like, "Hey Moses, we want to go back to Egypt. Like this is not great. We don't want to listen to what God said." And God came up, swallowed, like literally opened the earth and swallowed those people, and then he burned thousands more alive because of their rebellion. Again, they were just like questioning God and saying, "We don't want to do this." Seems really cruel and harsh to me. But then why? So I was meditating on it, or just sitting there and quietly listening to God's word, whatever you want to call it, and this popped into my head, and it was like blew my mind, right? So, and by the way, if it says this in the Bible and I just haven't gotten to that part yet, then I apologize. Or if this is like a well-known theology that everybody else knows and I'm just late to the race, then sorry. Also, if I'm completely off base and crazy, feel free to let me know that too. But here we go. So, what came to my mind? Well, back during Moses' time, we didn't have cell phones or printing presses or barely anything to write with, right? Like at all. So, how is God's rule and law and word going to go from generation to generation for a long time? And the only way that God could ensure that his people pass along his word with accuracy is by literally burning it into their minds, right? If I told you, "Hey, I need you to stop at every stop sign for 3 seconds before you start driving again," and you didn't stop at the stop sign for 3 seconds and you kept driving, and I was like, not a big deal, you would probably not get that rule burned into your mind. But if I said, "Hey, you need to stop at that stop sign for 3 seconds, and if you don't, then the earth is going to swallow you up and probably anybody around you too," and then that happened, anybody that witnessed that would be like, "Okay, Kyle's really serious about stop signs, so we need to make sure that everybody knows about the stop sign rule," right? And so God does this with all of his teaching, right? And he also says every time you read about laws given from God in the Old Testament, he doesn't say, "Hey, these are my laws for you." He says, "These are my laws for you in all future generations." So he's telling them that you need to tell everybody. It also says that the foreigners living amongst you. So he means everybody you interact with needs to know my law, and they need to know how serious I am. Okay. But then the question rises, why is it so important for people to know these rules and these laws? Okay. Well, God said the wage of sin is death. If you sin, you have to submit a sacrifice, a blood sacrifice. Something has to die to pay for your sin. Because when you sin, you are separating yourself from God. And the punishment of that is death, right? Why did God make that rule? The best I can speculate is because God is so perfect and holy, he can't have any sin in his presence. So if we want to go to heaven to be with God one day, our creator, we have to be completely clean, because we will toil with soil, whatever, heaven in his presence. So we can't do that. He can't allow that. So I can get my mind wrapped around why that needs to be. But sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. So then it's like we go to these offerings, right? Like the sin offerings, and you have to slaughter a lamb and spread the blood and do all this stuff. And it says that when you burn the animal, that the aroma is pleasing to God. And reading that, it makes me think, like, what a really like kind of conceited God. I don't like that at all. Like, he's like, "Oh, wonderful people, you're burning things for me. I feel so good now that you love me so much." And that is not the God I know. So then I was thinking, I was like, what could this possibly mean when it says God was pleased? So then this came into my mind. God was pleased. This is just either my opinion or whatever came into my mind. God was pleased because when he smells the offering, he smells the aroma, he knows that his will is being done. And he knows that these people are taking what I said seriously. And they're going to pass this information on from generation to generation. Because you have to remember that God exists outside of time. So every time they do something that submits to God's will, he gets to see into the future for thousands of years and say, yep, that did it. Like my word gets passed on. And he gets to see that this gets created, right? And so that's why he's doing all of that, again, in my opinion. So then the question arises, why don't we see the same requirements and, I guess, harshness now? And this, I think this is more commonly known. I don't think this is anything super creative for me. But when Jesus comes, he sets up a New Testament. If we back up a little bit, back all the way to Genesis, God tells Abraham that he's going to set up a covenant for him, right? And he tells Abraham, hey, if you screw this up, I'll actually sacrifice myself. I'm paraphrasing here, and I'm trying to remember the story because I read it one time, so please forgive me if I'm a little incorrect in this. But I think essentially, if I remember correctly, God says, hey, not only will I set up this covenant, but if you screw this up, I will uphold my end of the bargain, and I will provide the sacrifice, right? So what he's doing is foreshadowing Jesus. And then Jesus comes along. Okay, so that covenant set up that all of his chosen people, the Israelites, they'll have this land filled with milk and honey. Okay. So Jesus comes along, and Jesus knows, because he is God, that the people at the time know the Old Testament like the back of their hand, better than the back of their hand, because they study it very intently because of how important this has been for generations and generations. So Moses and the Israelites did their job, right? Due to God's harshness. So Jesus comes along, and he uses this, right, the Old Testament, the Torah, to be able to display to people that he is who he says he is. And a really good example of this is when Moses goes on Mount, I don't know if it's Mount Ararat or Mount Sinai, whatever, I can't remember what the mountain's called, where it's the Ten Commandments, that's what I'm trying to allude to. And it says that the hand of God reaches down and God carves in the stone the Ten Commandments with his finger, right? Or with his arm or whatever. And then we flash forward to when the adulterer comes out and is caught, and there's a group of people that are surrounding her, and they say, hey, God says we have to stone her to death, right? That's what God said. And they were going to stone her to death, right? Because these people took this stuff very seriously. But Jesus happened to be there, and he came in and said, no. I am a new covenant. I don't know, in this story, I don't know if he says this exactly, but this is what he's meaning. He's saying, I'm a new covenant. And it says that Jesus reaches down in the dirt or the sand, and with his finger, he writes something in the sand. And the Bible doesn't tell us what he writes, but the people at the time understood what he was doing. He said, I am God, and I'm writing something. He probably wrote some rule, or maybe wrote one of the Ten Commandments. We don't know. We can only speculate. But the people at the time understood what Jesus was doing. He was doing what God did with the Ten Commandments. And then he essentially says, he who has no sin, throw the first stone. Meaning like, hey, you've all sinned. You are all due to be put to death according to God's rule. But I'm here now, right? So let her live. And he says, go away and do not sin, right? So he doesn't say, hey, you're forgiven. You just go on about your day. You keep on sinning. He says, go and do not sin, but you're forgiven, right? And that only works. All of this only works and comes together if God is harsh in the Old Testament to make sure that information gets all the way to the time of Jesus, where he gets to tell everybody, I am setting a new covenant. The old covenant is gone. I am the new covenant. You don't need to sacrifice anything anymore. You don't need a tabernacle to talk to God. You're going to talk to me. I am the way to talk to God. And so you don't need to sacrifice lambs because I am the lamb. When I shed my blood, it will be for all sin. And I believe, okay, and I made a video about this the other day, that prior to Jesus's arrival, that when people died, they went to Hades and paradise, not heaven and hell. And they're awaiting final judgment. And final judgment comes when Jesus died on the cross. So I don't know what happened to them during that time, but I don't believe that they're there now. I believe they were there up until the point of Jesus's death and resurrection, right? And then came for judgment. There might even be a speculation that final judgment is when Jesus' second coming. So maybe they are still there. I don't know. But that's also another way that I can wrap my mind around how God could just kill thousands and thousands of people and send them to like an early judgment is kind of the way I looked at it. It's like, how did he strip all these people away if they didn't have an opportunity to find God and to follow him, or in today's case, like find Jesus, right? So I think that's kind of what transpired there. So sorry, this is getting kind of long again, but I don't know, that just kind of blew my mind, because as I'm reading through and I have these questions that pop up, I think it's really important that as Christians, if we're having conversations with somebody that's pretty unsure, wavering on their faith, and if this is one of the justifications they have for not wanting to follow the Bible and Jesus, then we need to be able to address it, right? And maybe I'm just explaining things away, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And it's also really important to know that we are just mere humans. God is perfect. He's wise beyond our comprehension. I mean, there are people on this earth that are wise beyond my comprehension. So I can only imagine how much smarter an omniscient being like God is, right? So that's kind of it for now. Oh, there was one other, I'm going to throw in one more metaphor, because I think this kind of helped me too. So as a dad, if you have kids or even a pet or something, but if you set a rule out for your children and your children break the rule and you don't follow up with the punishment that you told them that they were going to have, do you think they're going to keep the rule? And I can tell you from firsthand experience, and I'm guilty of this thousands of times, that they will not, right? If I tell my kids, hey, don't hit your brother, or you lose dessert tonight, and then later on, it's like, oh, well, it's a special occasion. Go ahead and get dessert anyway. But next time, don't do it. They're absolutely going to hit their brother again. But if I say, don't hit your brother again, and they hit their brother, and I say, oh, you lose dessert. I don't care that it's your birthday, right? You did the crime. You got to pay the time. They're much less likely to hit their brother again. And if you do that to the fullest extent, people are going to remember and follow the rules. So anyways, I just want to throw that metaphor in, because I was also thinking about that too. So anyways, let me know if I'm crazy. Let me know if you've never heard this line of thinking before, if you think it maybe makes sense, and if you've had this question before and maybe it's helped you like consolidate that a bit, just let me know. That's all I have, and I will catch you guys here pretty soon.